Hello and welcome to the Now Spinning Magazine podcast with me, Phil Aston. And on this episode, I'm absolutely delighted to have with me Harvey Lee, who's the author of a new book called Backstage Pass.
There we go. We can both send it at the same time.
Yeah. 50% rock and roll, 50% business, and 100% true. This is a music book, and it would stand alone as a music book. It would also stand alone as a business book, but a very, very different sort of business advice book. There's some real laugh out loud moments, but there's also a lot of really honest and kind of thought-provoking advice as well. As all of us, whoever you are watching or listening to this, will know there's various things in your life where things go well and things don't go well. And what I really loved about this book is everything that you'd expect in life, ups and downs, is in it. So welcome, Harvey, and how are you doing? And tell me first of all, this is a book that could have easily just been a book about your life, easily, because it's that good.
Yeah.
But did it start? Did you think music book or business book?
That's a really good question. And thanks, Phil, for having me on the show. It was I got goosebumps when you were doing the intro there. I thought, who could he possibly be talking about? It's me. It's a really interesting question. And it was a huge dilemma for me from my music background and from my marketing background. When I looked at it in simple terms, I thought, well, if I wrote a biography about music, who the hell would care? Because who's going to buy a book from someone they've never heard of? Even if it is the best book in the world, you and I know the best product doesn't always win. And then I thought, well, maybe I should just turn it into a hardcore marketing book. And then I answered my own question on that, because it only takes 5 seconds on Amazon to do a search for marketing books. And when it presents you with 6,000 results and you see some pretty big names on there, you realize, well, what's the point in even trying to compete? And that's not defeatist, it's just being realistic. So I thought, what can I do? How can I tell the story that's going to be interesting and valuable in a way that not just music fans would appreciate, or people with an interest in the inner workings of the music business, or just general music fans, but also marketing and business people as well. So what I try to do is address both in the same book. And that's where the format, I've been told the format's quite unique about it. It comes about. So it's a book of career and life lessons wrapped around a true rock and roll story. That's the way I sort of articulate it. But even for a long time, I wasn't able to even articulate it properly because it was so different. So I came up with this idea of, well, you know what? I've learned a lot. Even with all these funny stories that I used to tell at the water cooler or the coffee shop in all my corporate jobs years gone by, there are lessons in life that have come out of it that are useful for everybody, whether you're in marketing or not, whether you're in music or not. It just transverses across life as we live it, regardless of whether you're 20 years old or 60 years old. I'm knocking on the latter, not the former end of that scale. And so I thought, you know what, we had to sit down with the editor, and I thought, well, why don't we structure it this way? And so every chapter is written as if it's like a movie, as if it's me speaking you all the way through a particular moment in my life, through discovery of music, finding your drive, finding your passion, through to actually making it happen, and all the bits in between. And then as you know, because you've read the book, but for the benefit of those watching and listening, at the end of every chapter, I summarize what happened in each chapter as sort of 2 to 3 pithy life and career lessons that people could take something out of and put into action in their job or in their life, sort of right then and there, And it's made for, well, the reaction's just been phenomenal. I don't want to say it's a compelling read. The market have told me it's a very compelling read, and it seems to be doing pretty well. It's not even out yet,
I think it works because obviously you left school at 15. You hadn't got any qualifications.
Yeah, still don't.
But this is I think is a very good point for a lot of people, a lot of young people watching or reading this book, is that the gateway into lots of things that you want to do are kind of the hurdles are you need to have studied this, you need to have this
Yeah.
degree, you need to have this
Yeah.
qualification. You kind of just, you came across that, and in the book you were quite surprised that all of a sudden maybe education was important, but your dad taught you the power of words.
Yes, he
And
did.
you kind of then thought, I can do words, and you
Yeah.
use the words as like keys to unlock any
Yeah.
door that was in your way, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. And it was very well put, actually, Phil. So, I mean, the fact that I'm now an author and I've been a columnist for marketing websites and magazines for a while as well, sort of plays testament to that. But I've always been good with words, whether it's written word or spoken word, articulation. So I've always been a good public speaker, and I do the public speaking circuit now. And words are very powerful, and they can lift people up and they can put people down, and they can motivate or they can demotivate. And I found a mixture of words being really open to opportunity. And when finding opportunity, whether it came my way or I created it, we can come on to the luck surface area in a minute. Um, I then found if I threw myself at something, I found that I had a knack of making things happen. So it was kind of writing the formula, the algebra of how to make things happen. So it was words, the luck surface area, which is create your own opportunity. It doesn't happen by itself. And then commitment, which is throw yourself at it. And some of the stories in the book where I throw myself at things, literally like a rag doll across the room. Sometimes I had really great results, and sometimes I had spectacular failures. But there was always something to be learned and built on from any of it.
But you also kind of like you were powered by ACDC from seeing them in Manchester on the Black in Black tour, weren't you? That was kind of like
Yeah,
what plugged you into the mains and thinking,
yeah,
I want some of that
yeah. It
life.
was. It was like a direct injection of electricity, literally, as the name ACDC would suggest. Actually, it was for those about to rock tour, 1982,
Yeah.
3rd of October at the Manchester Apollo. Y&T was supporting, and actually, I still love them as well.
Yeah, me too.
And Yeah, I left to change my mind. I remember hearing AC/DC. It was Top of the Pops, early 1980, early-ish 1980. I think it was about May or June, and it was Rock and Roll at Noise Pollution. It was on Top of the Pops, came on, and literally I was never the same again. So when they hit the road a year later on the For Those About to Rock tour, because I was only 12 when Black in Black came out. And just to put into context for people watching and listening, this is a 12-year-old boy at the beginning of secondary school who heard it and literally morphed into a different person in front of his parents' eyes, to their dismay. They were just like, yeah, what happened to being a doctor? And so yeah, I came out of that concert, my ears ringing. I think my ears are still ringing, and I'm nearly 56. And it just set me on a path. And then from there on in, as I narrate through the book, there was a series of events that just unlocked as I went from one event to another. A door would close, a door would open, a door would close, and a door would open, and then a sort of spell out what I did to sort of open those doors, as some of them were shut firmly in my face at the same time.
You kind of, because you went from school, let's say, no qualifications. I think your dad got you in at Marks and Spencer's, where you had quite an adventure with the mums of a certain age waiting to get their turkeys on Christmas Eve.
Yeah, that story seems to be pretty popular. The turkey run seems to pop up everywhere.
Well, because I think this is a story where I think many people watching and listening to this remember their mums or I'm going to say mums of a certain age, getting ready for Christmas dinner was such a key thing. Getting the turkey on Christmas Eve from Marks and Spencer's.
Yeah, it was a big thing. Yeah, it was such a huge cultural moment. I don't think I actually even while I was writing it, I didn't even really appreciate it, because I wrote it from my point of view as being, the stock boy or the store boy, and from my experience. But of course, the cultural moment from the mum's point of view is something that everybody will identify with,
Totally.
And I did two winters there, two Christmases there, when I was 15 and 16, and it was the same every year. It was just rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse. Of course, it's an era that is a bygone era now, and it doesn't really happen that way anymore.
Very true, but you could have easily stayed there, and probably had a career there at some
Mm,
point. But you
mm.
wanted to get sorry, not back into music,
Yes,
and
yes.
you managed to find a night course in sound engineering,
Yeah,
which was only in the evening, so you had a lot of spare time, and that's
yeah.
where I think one of the big doors opens, where you end up being a roadie for a band called Hermits,
I
which were
did,
an
yeah.
old band back then.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
this part of the book is a trampoline into what happened next is probably unique to your initiatives and ideas in, because you started off just as a roadie,
Yes.
but you became more than that, didn't you?
I did, yeah. I still have a very, very tight connection with Herman's Hermits. I don't. It's not like I speak to them every day, but especially with Lainey, the widow of Derek Leckenby, the original guitar player. We're still very connected, and she's been a huge supporter of the book as well, and she's been very helpful being a fact checker as well. And so I made this connection with Herman's Hermits coming out of roadieing for them, literally for £5 in a bag of chips in the back of a transit van, which is how I said to someone in an interview yesterday, this is how all great bands start, in the back of
Yeah,
a transit van. I,
yeah.
I don't care whether you're The Who or ACDC, you started in the back of a transit van. It might not happen that way these days, but certainly in the noughties, the 90s, the 80s, the 70s, the 60s, and the 50s, that's how it happened. And I was no different. And I just made a connection with the work, the culture of the work, and the bands themselves. And some of the bands I got on with better than others. But the Herman's Hermits were, they were a Manchester band. They lived around the corner. Most of them lived around the corner from my parents, where I was living at the time. And in the college holidays, when I was studying to be a sound engineer, a studio sound engineer, in one end of term, they took me to a tour on Europe, around Germany and Scandinavia. And while I was there, they asked me to go to America with them, which was very, very unexpected. I wasn't expecting it. In fact, the guy I was touring with was expecting to go because he'd been with them for a few years. And I'd been with them a matter of weeks, and they were asking me, which made the atmosphere a bit challenging. But so, long story short, I went. At the age of 19. I went to America, and I think that's the trampoline really that you're referring to.
But you also had, because you weren't just someone who picked up the Marshall 4x4s and guitar
Yeah,
cases. You
yeah,
actually went out of what they expected you to do, and
yeah.
suddenly found you had a natural talent for sales.
Yes.
You started selling the T-shirts in a way that they hadn't thought of.
Yeah, well, you might have noticed I'm trying to sell a book at the moment. But the story that the story that you mentioned, you're absolutely right. And again, it's one of those stories that's caught me by surprise. Even when I was writing it, it's my life. I take some of these things for granted, not in a blasé way.
Yeah.
I never thought the T-shirt merch stories would resonate so much as it has done with people. And so, just for the benefit of everybody, yeah, you're right. I started humping gear. It was like Fender Twins and Telecasters and whatever else I could pick, push, lift, and drop. And then it was, oh, we need you to sell T-shirts, because if you're going to come away with us outside of the UK, we've got to pay your wages somehow. And it ain't going to be £5 in a bag of chips. It's like proper wages, which I think I got paid 164 quid a week, which in 1988 for a 17-year-old kid living at home was a fortune.
Yeah.
But yeah, I had to earn my keep, right? I had to earn my keep. So they were like, the door money's ours, or our fee's ours. The T-shirt money is not all yours, but it's contributing to your wages. So you've got skin in the game. You better flog a few. And one of the main reasons why I got picked to go to America was my entrepreneurial ability to sell T-shirts. That was probably really what it came down to, because the other guy was probably a better sound engineer than me, but he didn't want to sell T-shirts.
You got a nickname as well, didn't you?
I did,
Shekel.
yeah. My nickname was I was called the Shekel.
Yeah.
And the reason for that was that I just showed this entrepreneurial flair for flogging merchandise at the shows. And, in Germany, it all really came to a head as a story in the book. It all really came to a head where we're doing this huge shows, about 5,000 people in Germany. And we're there with the Sweet and Brian Conley and a few other bands from the 60s and 70s. And no one's selling nothing, right? And it's in this big arena, big ice hockey arena. All the lights are out. The merch tables and stands are set up in a dark corner of the room, and no one can even see it. even though they're announcing it in English to 5,000 Germans. I mean, nobody can understand anything, right? So I'm like, yeah, this isn't happening. And the band are getting a bit antsy. They're just like, damn, we're not selling anything. So I just took it upon myself. I literally loaded up 3 sizes of t-shirts on my arms like a market trader, and I started walking through the stalls up and down inside this huge arena shouting t-shirts, t-shirts. They're drinking steins of ice beer and eating the pretzels and all of this. And I just started flogging them for, I don't know how much it was. It was pre-EU, so it was in Deutschmarks, but I don't remember exactly how much it was, but it was a reasonable price, And I made it a round number so people could just give me one note and not get any change. So it's literally like, here's 10, here's a tenner, here's a tenner, here's a tenner. That was it. And I flogged 3 boxes of t-shirts in one night, and literally all the bands put together sold like 6 t-shirts.
Wow.
So I earned my nickname when I got back to the dressing room, threw a wad of Deutschmarks down on the table and said to Lek, there you go, there's your money. And I gave him a nice problem to have. He's like, we don't have any more merchandise anymore. I'm like, well, that's a nice problem. You had a worse problem half an hour ago. So there you go. So I got my nickname, the Shekel, my ability to make money, and the rest was history.
But it gets more kind of like, not bizarre or outlandish than that, because you start off, as you say, humping amplifiers, and then you're selling the merchandise. You said you go off to America, but because of a strange set of coincidences, one of the members of the band has to go off because death in the family. You end up playing bass in the band.
My claim to fame is I'm Herman's Hermits' shortest ever member, official member. I played 3 shows. I was in the band for 3 days. And I got paid for it as well. So I'm a fully signed up member of Herman's Hermits. But the most bizarre thing was, obviously the circumstances were tragic for Paul. But for me, I was just like, failure was not an option. I didn't have a choice. It's like, for bands like the Hermits, who tour for a living, they make the money off touring and merchandise. Canceling 3 shows at 24 hours notice was not an option. When we needed to do 3 or 4 shows a week to pay the bills and make the whole thing viable, right? So they didn't even ask me; they just told me, and they just went, "You're playing bass tomorrow night, Shekel," and I'm left-handed.
And you're left-handed.
I'm left-handed as well, so they had to restring the bass for me. It was a Fender Jazz, so they had to restring the bass for me, Hendrix style. Not that I've got any inkling of his talent, but I only had 4 strings to contend with, so it was fine, and 3 chords. So I had to learn the set, even though I've heard it 1,000 times. I didn't know how to play it. I had to learn the set in the back of a van on a Sony Walkman for 2 hours. We dropped Paul off at the airport, carry on playing. The next night, I'm wearing I think it was a silver lame suit, but of course, this is 1988. In those days, my hair was down here. As you've seen the picture, there's a picture in the book, straight after that first show. And everyone was like, yeah, he's not an original member, is he? But we did it. We got away with it. And it was a good show, and the band were thrilled. And it was like, it's these moments where you really dig in that bonds are forged. And it's those moments that still to this day, those bonds are forged.
Do you also think, though, because you were obviously... You were back, well, how, 19, 20?
I was 19. I went to that till I was 19. So, I had my 20th birthday while I was there.
Yeah, so you're a teenager.
Yeah.
So nearly 20, but because also you're doing tons of driving in countries that you don't know.
Yes.
And so there were lots of things here. You've been a roadie with Hermits. You're selling the merch. You're deciding to go out amongst the auditorium, amongst all these people in a country where you don't speak the language. You're driving thousands of miles.
Yes.
And now you're having to play with the band and learn the songs on a Walkman in the back of the van.
Yeah. And
what's interesting, what I take from this is that at not one point did you say, I can't do this.
No, never.
Or your nerves got the better of you and you said, I can't, look, I'm already driving 1,000 miles. I can't do it. You actually just kept saying, okay then.
Yeah. Say yes to everything.
Yeah.
My policy was, and it's not anymore, but I like to be more opportunistic than not. Say yes to everything and throw yourself at it with everything that you've got. Because if you think about it, my career, my options in those days, and I still have this attitude even today at my age, and I'm nearly 56. My attitude in those days was failure is absolutely not an option, because if this doesn't work, there is no plan B, right? Arnold Schwarzenegger did a very famous talk a few years back called there's no plan B. And that was my life. I didn't have any plan B. It's like, if I'm going to do this, I am just going to have to throw myself at it. And it's going to work or it's not going to work, but I've just got to keep going at it. And so when an opportunity would come up, an opportunity would beget an opportunity, right? So one door opens another, and then maybe two doors open and one door closes. And you just scratch and claw your way through it, especially in a business like the music business, where it doesn't have a formalized career path like some businesses.
You did, although you did say no to one opportunity, didn't you? Because you were offered a job in a studio in the States, weren't you?
Yes.
But you actually said no to that.
Yeah, I did. Again, I was 19 and I was training as a sound engineer. And then I got offered a sound engineer's job in America. And I'm like, what's not to like?
Yeah.
But the reality of the matter is, I think that was a moment where I thought it was just a stretch too far, because I knew there was no green card. I'd be an illegal alien. I knew I'd be sleeping on a sofa. And by the way, you didn't see the sofa. It was rank. It wasn't even a nice sofa.
Yeah.
It's like sleeping on the sofa in America without any paperwork. Look, maybe it would have worked out, maybe it wouldn't, but it would have been a massive, massive struggle. And at that time, I still had the inclination that I was going to go back to England and finish my college course in sound engineering. So that was still my goal. Although, as you know, from reading the book, it didn't last very long when I got back to England.
But when you do go back to the UK, you start to help a band from further up north,
Yes.
who became Small Town Heroes.
Yes.
Now you absolutely poured everything into this.
Like I do.
This is before where they got a deal, but you spent ages with them before they changed their name. And what comes across in the book is, and I've heard other people say this to me over the years, is you've got to have the courage to make the call. And you just battled through receptionists to get hold of people who were well known from the Music Week directory, whatever it was, and you just kept going. Even then, going down to London and seeing people like Mickey Most, who just indifferently said, "Nah."
Yeah, I just battled my way into his office, literally using words, right? Using words.
Yeah.
I use words to open doors, literally open doors, physically. And oh my God, I can't believe I even did that. Looking back now, I'd be like, if my kids wanted to do that, I'd be like, are you crazy? But of course, that's what I did. And they're like, Dad, but yeah, you did it. And I'm like, it's a different time. But in the days that the Small Town Heroes weren't called the Small Town Heroes, they were called the Troubleshooters. We spent a good 2 or 3 years establishing ourselves on the Northeast club circuit, living off no money in skanky flats, on analog telephones. Don't forget, all of this is pre-internet. Half the book is set in the analog era of Britain in the 80s and early 90s. And it's literally picking up the phone, 600, no free calls. It was £600 a month phone bills to phone London. Phoning London was long distance in those days.
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
it was the same cost as phoning France. So it was hard work. Very, very hard work. And at the end of that part of that story with that band, I got to a point where I couldn't do anymore, and I went back touring again for a year or two. And it all, as you know, reading the book, it all got reinvented. It all reinvented itself somehow, and we all came back together again not so long after, and under a different name. I moved to London. I got them a record deal, and then we spent a few years on the road as a BMG and EG artist.
Yeah, you also. This is another point in the book where ACDC return.
The old bonfire box set. Yeah.
Now this part of the book is really interesting because obviously it made me go and find it off the shelf, and the fact that ACDC are a band that doesn't care about anything they've recorded in the past, because who knew that people might be interested in archive recordings box sets. And you actually meet I think someone who becomes your girlfriend, who then is working for ACDC, said they're trying to find this record, but there's only a few DJ copies. I don't know where we're going to find one from. You had 2 copies.
The bizarre thing is, they thought, so George Young, I get the call from George Young, and if you know anything about ACDC, he was co-producer for all their albums before Highway to Hell, and older brother of Angus and Malcolm. I get the call from George through his lady who I was dating at the time. And the bottom line is, for the album in question is called Live from the Atlantic Studios. It's a huge rarity. There's like 200 copies in the world, maybe 300. I mean, 25 years ago, they were selling for £200 a copy.
Wow.
Lord knows what they sell for now, right? Really, I haven't even bothered looking for 20 years. And I get the phone call, and the sound down the phone was of just complete exasperation, of beyond clutching at straws. They were clutching at dust. They were like, literally, they were like, by any stretch of the imagination, would you know anybody who's got one? Because I was well known in the fan community. And I'm like, yeah, me, I've got two. And they were sitting on a shelf 8 feet away, winking at me. So they went into the Albert studio. Albert's used to have a studio in London in those days, and all of this work was done in the Albert studio in London on this part of the Bonfire box set anyway. So the albums went in, carried like nitroglycerin into the studio the following day, and George dubbed off my vinyl onto the digital master tape. And that story is in the liner notes of that Bonfire box set that you've just shown me. The only thing is, it doesn't mention me by name. But of course, in my book, I tell you the full story of what happened, how it happened, who was involved, and people in the fan industry, fan community of, the hardest core nerds, and I used to be one of them, certainly, probably don't even know this story either. They only know what they've read on the liner notes of the CD.
No, it's an incredible story. And the fact that you get small town heroes assigned to EG Records, and the fact that how all this comes together is just an amazing story in the book. You then moved to London, you've got a proper job, you're in a plush office.
Yeah, mum and dad are happy.
Yeah. But there's an interesting, I think, an important part of the book here, because everything's looking good. And just like a lot of bands would have done, and I was in a position like this myself. Got this. We need to go and find a lawyer. We need to make sure we're not going to be ripped off. And you go off to see a lawyer who quite naturally looks at the contract and finds lots of things wrong with it. And then you go back and do a bit of negotiating. And what happens is they just say, that's it, deal's off, forget it, it's all over.
Yeah, and my whole world fell out of the back of my pants. I mean, I moved to London it wasn't on a whim. I knew this deal was being offered. So first of all, I knew it was being offered, but we didn't have it. It wasn't signed. So I moved to London. I moved in with Steve Bush, actually, Stereophonics producer, who wasn't the Stereophonics producer then, although that story's in the book as well. So I moved in with Bushy, who was also an aspiring producer. He was working at Dream Hire, a music equipment rental firm. So I moved in with him. He was looking for a lodger, and he had a room for rent. So I moved in with him. I had no money, literally had no money. And I set up the fax machine in my bedroom in this rented flat in North London. We start the negotiations. I'm like, well, I never even thought that it would not happen. Of course it's going to happen. They've offered us a deal. So the contracts go back and forth. And then it was like, no, and from the label. And I was like, what do you mean no? What do you mean no? I'm sitting there. I just bet the farm on this, and I was just like, it was just desperate beyond belief. And I don't want to give any spoilers away, but it was desperate beyond belief. And I had to, again, no plan B. And I had to find a way to rescue the deal. And desperation and begging was the only way I could do it. There was absolutely no other way of doing it. And how I did it, I
think this is where it really helps also as a business book. Because that must have happened to lots of people, where they then have a decision to make. Do they just follow what the lawyer or someone's saying, don't do this, don't do this, or you think, no, this is what I really want. This is the door I want to go through.
There was no option.
I think what the book, all the way through the book, all of your kind of business advice at the end of each chapter is about compromise in some ways.
Yeah. I mean, you have to get a win-win for everybody, right? So both sides, regardless of what you're trying to achieve, have to find a position that they're comfortable enough with to make it happen. So in the mutual interest, you can move forward. And that happens so many times. And look, the guys at EG, they're savvy, really, really savvy. But without going into detail or committing libel myself, there was other things going on at the time with the lawyers and the labels that had nothing to do with us, which I surmise may or may not have had something to do with it. But the reality of the matter is that, as you said, Phil, we had to make a decision, and I had to put it to the band. I'm like, look, it's your contract. You're signing it, not me. I'm the manager, right? You're the one who has to live with the consequences. And this is what it means. So I spelled it out for them. And it's like the option of not signing. What is the option of not signing? The option of not signing this deal is going back 10. No, it would have, at that point, it would have been 7 years. It would have been rewinding the calendar 7 years and starting over again, which wasn't really an option. We weren't getting any younger either. And here we were, ready and hot to trot. And I'm in London, and, we got an album half in the can. So the band made the decision themselves. I have to say it was the right decision under the circumstances. The band made the decision, we're going to ignore the lawyers and we're going to sign it. But this wasn't any old lawyer. It was the lawyer.
Yeah.
The lawyer, I won't mention him in our name, but he's in the book. The biggest music business lawyer in London, I would say at that time, probably forever. Right?
Yeah.
Went on to run multinational music companies and I don't know what. Anyhow, you have to read it in the book. But it was like, it wasn't any old lawyer. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we're going to do this. We're going to tell this presidential elect rock star lawyer who's like, God,
we're not going to take it. We're not going to listen to any of his advice.
Yeah, stuff your advice, mister. Send us the invoice. So that, which is ended up what we ended up doing. And then we had 3 years, and we made a really good fist of it for the next 3 years. But
it also shows this part of the book now, where for the band now, I've got a proper record deal. They've signed it, and everything that you try so many things to get this band out there and get them a hit single, get them exposure, even having like the first interactive singles, and all. But it doesn't work, does it? In the long run, it just doesn't.
In the long run, no. We had minor success after minor success, but it summed up to equal not enough at the end of the day. And they're a really good band. Let me put it this way: they're a really good band, and they deserved a shot. As with many other bands as well. Not any different from many other great bands who had a shot and didn't get there. It was right band, wrong place, wrong time. You could surmise it wasn't for the lack of effort. It wasn't the fact that they weren't great. They were fantastic on the road. If the internet had been around, because it was pre-internet, if the internet had been around and the tools that exist today, I still surmise that they would have had a chance, or they would have been able to find an audience somewhere. Right.
And probably, and the times we live in now, they would have mobilized that audience to actually buy things on a certain day, and it would have got them
exactly. I could have done so much more for them. But we were, as with bands in the 80s and 90s, you were at the mercy of Radio 1. And it's like, if you weren't on Radio 1, or should I say in the early to mid 90s, when Britpop was like the only thing that really mattered in the UK.
Yeah, you're invisible.
You're invisible. And that was the era we lived in. We were in the wrong time. We tried to reposition ourselves as part of the movement, but just we clearly weren't. We were just too classic rock for that. So it just didn't happen.
EG Records then hits the rocks in something, and you find yourself out of a job again, and the band have obviously lost their contract, and you kind of go for an interview at ZTT, and that doesn't work out. Yeah,
that's the understatement of the century. But let's not spoil that one. You have to read the book for that one.
I will just say, for those of you thinking, should I buy this book, that one of the laugh out loud moments is the ZTT interview with Jill Sinclair. That's all I'm going to say, but it will have you in stitches. Yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. Now, here you pivot out of the music business into the games arena, don't you?
Yeah.
First with GTA games, then Virgin Interactive.
Yeah.
Were you just thinking, well, I've done music, or this is going to pay the bills, and it's to do with media, I'm going here?
Yeah. It wasn't that straightforward. I was out of work for 10 months. I had a mortgage, I had a girlfriend. I'd started building a life in London, which is what I wanted to do. And then all of a sudden I found myself out of work. It was an interesting time in the music industry, which, anybody with a career also has to recognize where the tidal waves are. And this tidal wave was called the internet. And so I found myself out of work, just as the internet is really hitting, as Napster is becoming a thing, file sharing and piracy, and the music industry is in retreat. So a year or two beforehand, the equivalent to Billboard, which is Music Week in the UK, the back pages were full of jobs. Actually, when I needed a job, the back pages were just empty, unfortunately. So I'd always felt like, well, I'll get a job somewhere else. It'll be fine. If this ends, I'll go and work at EMI or something. But actually, when it did end, the context was the category and the world around us had changed, because we'd gone from selling CDs to file sharing and piracy and the internet, and the music industry being in retreat, and that it stayed in retreat for 10 years.
Yeah, it did. Yeah.
So it's not like I could hang around. So I did try, that ZTT story interview was part of that era of when I was really still committed to staying in the music industry. I thought, I've come this far. If I can get an interview with just someone like Trevor Horn and hold my own with Trevor Horn, I can do this, right? And I think that's a fair analogy.
You also say in your book that past achievements are no guarantee of success. Was this
correct? And that's exactly where we were, right?
Yeah.
So it's like we're all getting our proverbial behind handed to us on a silver platter by the internet. And it's like, well, guess what? Time moves on, and I've been in my flat for 10 months. I've got 2 months before I need to sell it. And I'm running out of money. So past achievements mean absolutely nothing when we look at reality of the time. So the call comes in, the call that you're alluding to, the call comes in. Hello, Harvey. Are you interested? From a recruiter. I found you in Music Week. Are you interested in video games? And it's like, not really. But once they explained to me what the role was and the similarities, the adjacentness of, a creative, still being in the creative world and being in a publishing orientated business, because films, music and video games and books, by the way, they're publish oriented business. It's just that the artists are different. You're either creating music, you're creating video games by writing code, you're writing words, you're all creators of a sort, and your works are published. And in the music industry, the publishers are the record labels and the music publishers. So it's the same, but slightly different. But it was adjacent enough in that era. As the music door was closing, the video games door was opening. So the internet killed music for quite a while, but it was fueling the fire of video games. And I found myself at the crossroads of it. And I never thought of it, but I got a phone call from a recruiter. I think she's still around to this day, actually. Would you be interested in video games? They're crying out for people. They're on the bottom of the crest of a wave. And there aren't enough experienced people in video games. So we're looking to film a music to recruit. I'm like, why not? I can use a gig. So yeah, like you say, but when the job came in, the job wasn't even in London. So I had to move back up north for a year, just under a year. Worked at Gremlin Interactive in Sheffield, which is where DMA, who did the Grand Theft Auto franchise, was based.
Yeah.
And then it was always a means to an end for me. It's like, well, I will come back to London, but I just need to sort of get my feet back under a desk somewhere for a little bit first. And then when I came back to London, it was to work for Virgin. And I did 3 years at Virgin before I went to Microsoft on the Xbox team. Yeah.
You also
so it really unlocked things for me.
You also had a side hustle talking about the internet. You actually, I presume you learned how to do this yourself. You designed a website for ACDC before they had one themselves.
I did learn how to do it myself. Yeah. Even to this day, it's still true. I'm learning how to use AI at the moment. It still baffles me.
But the ACDC website store, I won't go, because obviously this is another part of the book that's fantastic. But this again puts you in front of the band, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah. It does. Well, they don't. The funny thing, maybe it's not so surprising because we're talking about ACDC. Is like they're the most analog band in the world, and they still are. And in a way, it's why we love them, right? They just don't change, and we don't want them to change.
No, we don't know.
If they had a synthesizer in their music, I'd bin them tomorrow, but they don't. And the context was, they didn't have a website, even though the internet was blowing up at the time. They didn't have a website, and they didn't have a website for a very long time, actually. And I found myself back in London, footloose and fancy free, and I just threw myself into my obsession with ACDC. And I built out this website. It was called the ACDC Resource Centre. Yeah. It's not around anymore. But then it started getting, Metal Hammer and Kerrang started writing about it. and come into my flat to take photos of me. And I've got a photo of me from Metal Hammer somewhere with all my collection. And so I started building some notoriety, and I started interviewing some of the team members of ACDC. So George Young and Harry, I had a call with Harry Vander in Melbourne, and recorded the interview for the website. And so I was getting access to their inner network. And that's one of the reasons why I got the call for the Bonfire box set. It's also one of the reasons that I got the call from their record label. In 2001, it was on the Stiff Upper Lip album, just to give people a sort of context. There it is, Stiff Upper Lip. Great title track, still one of the best title tracks of an album ever. And so their record label ring me up and go, we're working on the campaign. Funnily enough, it was a product marketer, which is my field. She rings me up and she goes, "Oh, hi, it's blah, 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 EMI," who was the label at the time. And we want to do some internet digital marketing stuff, but the band don't do any. Like, they're clueless. Bless them. They're clueless. I'm like, okay, what do you want? They're like, well, can you come in and have a chat? So I went to EMI. We had a chat. And again, the full story's in the book. And they wanted access to my website. They wanted to use my website. They wanted access to all the database that I'd built with all the email addresses. And I'm like, it's going to cost you. And they're like, we don't have any budget. And I'm looking around the office, there's pictures of Freddie Mercury. And I'm like, gold statues everywhere. And I'm like, there's absolutely no way I'm swallowing this horse, there's absolutely no way. But I'm like, you know what? Let me make it easy for you. Just give me some swag, right? And a gold disc. And I'm like, give me a gold disc to acknowledge my contribution, and I'll do it for you. And they had to think about it. I'm like, don't be a cheapskate. Come on. What's it going to cost you? 200 quid. And anyhow, they agreed to it. And again, rest is history. We did the campaign. It was great. And they ended up using my website address on all the official advertising. That's how little they had for ACDC in the digital area in 2001. They used my website. And I remember getting a really big kick. I was in a tube station and I was reading Kerrang as well at the same time when the album was out. And I was like, there's my website address on the bottom of the official ACDC advertising.
Oh, incredible.
I'm kicking myself. I never kept it or took a picture, but it was there. It was part of the deal. Yeah. It was incredible.
And then I think you were with Virgin Interactive when you met them in Germany, didn't you? After they'd come on.
Yeah. I was. When they were on the Stiff Upper Lip tour in 2001, I made it my business to go to every show in the UK. I drove to every show in the UK, and I went to all the major stadium shows around Europe. And I wrote about it, did a full tour blog, of which EMI had access to as well. And so I went to Stade de Paris, went to that show, went to the Olympic Stadium in Munich, went to a couple of others, and then the other one was in Hamburg. And Virgin, the Hamburg show wasn't that huge, but the reason I went to Hamburg is because when I was working at Virgin, the Virgin office was in Hamburg. And I just thought, I'll tie it into a work trip, right? So I flew over to Hamburg, did a work trip, sort of semi-work trip, and went with a workmate. And we went to the show. I wrote the article. I went back to the hotel, which I always stayed at the same hotel when I traveled for Virgin. So in Hamburg, it was the Park Hyatt. And I'm stood at the bar, and I said to my friend, I said, wouldn't it be funny if ACDC just walked in now? It's after the show. Yeah. Wouldn't it be funny? And I turn around, and I'm looking at Angus. He just walked in, and then the rest of the band walk in, and I'm like, oh my gosh. I just spoke the words, and they just appeared. And I don't want to spoil it because the full story is in the book. But there's a photo of the book with me, with Angus and the band, at the Park Hyatt in Hamburg that night in 2001, where events happened and rolled out, and serendipity and fate and destiny, or whatever you want to call it, all rolled into one. Just happened in a 5-minute space, a random choice meeting. With my. But
it's amazing that ACDC, this band that absolutely motivated you and changed your life at such an early age, came interweaving with you. Yeah. And then again, we don't want to spoil it because it's in the book, but you move on then to working for Microsoft and the Xbox. And this is a great story in itself because of it's how not to launch things, how to launch things and how not to launch things again.
Yes, it is.
And I know my eldest son knows very much the term the red ring of death, for instance.
Oh yes. Well, I lived it. Literally, I lived the red ring of death, amongst other things. Yeah, well, I mean, look, nobody. Funnily enough, most people just don't see the pivot from music to video games. But like you say, it was a creative industry, and I pivoted to it. And I very fortunately created the right time in the right place to get the call from Microsoft for the interview when before the Xbox actually launched in 2000, where I was interviewing for them, and I thought, well, if I get this gig, it's a great step up to go to Microsoft from Virgin. And although I did enjoy my time at Virgin, I have to say, I just thought, well, I'll go there for 3 years because every job I've ever had before that, I had been there for 3 years. And my MO was always the same. Knock it out for the park for the first year, throw myself at it. Second year, sustain it, leverage all the equity that I built. And third year, get really bored and move on. And I just thought this would be no different. But then I stayed 12 years. So it's like, and I wasn't expect. It was the most unexpected 12 years of my life. So yeah, you're right. I was employee number 12 on the fledgling Xbox launch team
Wow.
in the UK. I was the last one in the door. It was about 3 months before it came out, which was March 14th, 2002 in Europe. And stayed 12 years. So we launched it, and there's 4 chapters in the book about Xbox,
Yeah.
the 4 last chapters. And I talked through the story of how the first Xbox came about and how we launched it. Then the success we had with the Xbox 360, which was a phenomenal success. And then the challenges that we had with the Xbox One, which is ironically the third Xbox. Don't ask me why it's called the Xbox One. I've still got a beef about that. And so on and so forth. I actually do a talk on the speaking circuit called The 3 Lessons Xbox Taught the World. And it's a half-hour to 40-minute talk about all the key lessons from a marketer's point of view of what Xbox did, because it's a story that's never been told, right? There's a corporate version of it, which you can go on YouTube and you can see all the execs talking about it, and they make everything sound so pretty and nice. Even the Red Ring of Death doesn't sound like a near fatal incident, which it was. But I talk about it from a staff member's point of view about what it was actually like in the trenches. Right, this is really what happened, and this is how it happened, and it wasn't all pretty. It was pretty gritty, and so there's a lot of surprises in the book. You'll be quite surprised about how some of these big names, these big corporations behave. Not all well, I have to say. And again, it's one of my key takeaways when I was writing the book. It's like, you know what, some of these corporations are really badly behaved or really badly mismanaged, or somehow I just wonder how they even became successful in the first place. But anyhow, it's all in there. Yeah.
So and then you're an author.
Yeah.
And at the back of the book it says you're thinking of writing the next stage, chapter 2 in this,
yes,
as well.
Yes.
Is that going to take off from where this one leaves off? Or
basically, yes. Yeah. It's sequential. So this book spans from 1980. Until about 2013, 2014, when I leave Microsoft, when I leave the Xbox team. So that's about 10 years ago. I left about 10 years ago and went into tech, but still stayed in marketing. But the interesting thing is, I was having the conversation, a year and a half ago with my editor, and I was like, how big should this book be? Because I can carry on writing it. It was going to end up being, when we did the word count, it was going to end up being like War and Peace. So we're just like, look, we need to find a natural break for this edition of the story. And the natural break was when I left Microsoft and pivoted out of video games into cybersecurity, another pivot. And so the theme for the next book, it'll still have some music in it. It won't be as musicy, although I wish that wasn't true. But the reality of it is it's still full of all the funny stories, but they're just not told from a music point of view, because there were so many shenanigans in the corporate world that people just wouldn't believe, some of which are in the Microsoft passages in this book. And then there's an equal amount in all the other stories as well. So you'll laugh, you'll cry, you'll learn, and you can join me on the journey.
Well, it is a fantastic book, and it's very, very inspiring. As I've said, there's lots of laugh out loud moments, but there's some very kind of thought-provoking passages for anybody, whatever your career path, whatever you're doing in your life. If you're about to start something new, or you've been doing something for longer than perhaps you should, there's lots of advice here on pushing you forwards. I mean, one of the things that comes across in this, Harvey, is that you constantly just leapt out of your comfort zone,
Yeah.
time after time,
Yeah,
when
I'm doing
many
it right
other
now.
people would have just many other people would have just held on to the rail thinking, I think
Yeah.
that'll do for now. But
Yeah,
you just
yeah.
literally kept pushing forwards.
Yeah, you know what? Coming back to the beginning of the book, and I don't want to spoil the beginning of the book because you know how it starts. My life now still goes all the way back to those moments where at school, and maybe your listeners and viewers will recognize this. At school, I was told I wasn't good enough, right? I was told that if I don't adhere to the structure of the establishment and study this way and study that and take this subject and take that, that basically I'll be nothing. That's what I was told by my careers teacher, right? And every other teacher and the establishment and the institutions and the teachers reinforced that in every lesson with me. And maybe some of the kids fell into line. I mean, probably most of them fall into line because they don't push back. But it wasn't in my nature, right? It didn't interest me enough to fall into line. I tried falling into line. I fell out again. And well, I crashed out. And it all comes to a head in the book anyhow, but I'm still like that. It's like I never really fell into line. Even for all of these years, all these decades that I worked for corporations, I was always the odd one out, right? I always never fell into line. And maybe I think my time at Xbox was so long is that I found a place where I could call home for a long period of time without actually, accidentally finding it. But like you say, I've always pushed forward. I'm pushing forward as an author now and as a freelance consultant as well, and as a speaker, because I don't see that there is a plan B right now. My plan B would have been to go back to corporates, right? I could do that until I retire, but I've chosen not to because, as you'll find out in the next book, that my time there was just done. And I'm finding that now, especially coming out of lockdown, and there's another topic, but there's a lot of people now coming out of lockdown, reevaluated their lives and thought, well, what is it all about? I asked myself that question from the age of 15, so it's nothing new for me, but it feels like the rest of the world's taken 40 years to catch up. But that's ultimately what it came down to. So I'm still doing it, still proving to myself or proving to my careers teacher that actually it doesn't have to be that way.
Well, my last question, Harvey, and thank you for all of your time today, is
Pleasure.
that a lot of people go through life and they always think that they're up against people saying, what university did you go to? What degree did you get to get this job? You obviously you had none of that. You were a blank piece of paper, but you just knew what you wanted to do.
Yeah.
In some ways, where we are now with the internet, a lot of younger people now, it's based on what you've prove you can do rather than what you can do on paper. So with the internet, you can set up things, you can create things, and you can build up a portfolio of things without having to go off to uni or do anything like that.
Agree. I think that the work from that world has become, I think it's more and more positive. Actually, it's become more democratized. People have got more opportunity. They've got more choice. Whether it's music or whether it's marketing or whether it's whatever it is that you're interested in the creator economy or not the creator economy, it doesn't matter anymore because the options are there. I mean, when I was growing up, the options weren't there. You had to be classed as a rebel and push against the system to be able to do it. But now you don't. It's almost like the system supports you. And I think even in the past less than 5 years, it's changed again. Not because of the internet or because of what's available, but because lockdown and the cost of living and the quality of degrees now and what they actually get you by the fact that more than 50% of kids go to university now, it's actually watered down the impact of what it actually means to have a degree. And there's been some great studies. I've read a lot of them that shows you that unless you need a degree for the career path that you've chosen, let's say you want to be a lawyer. Actually, in this country, you can be a lawyer without a degree, but as long as you do the bar. But in the US, you need a degree. You want to be a doctor or something like that, where you need to go to medical school, university school. I'm not sure there's any point anymore. And especially with the cost. So if you factor in the tens and tens of thousands of costs and all the debt that's associated with it, what the studies now show, the amount of incremental money you'll make from going to university now is next to nothing. So, but you'll be saddled with debt. So what is the point? And like you say, Phil, it's now democratized to a point where from a very early age, and I would encourage any kids, if any parent, any people listening or watching this that have got kids who are teenagers that are wondering what to do, encourage them to start a side hustle while they're at school. Start creating, even if it's not successful, find your passion, find out what you're not good at, what you don't like. It's as good as finding out what you do like, because you can just chalk it off and say, okay, I learned something that's not for me. Let's go in this direction. And while you're young enough and the tools exist, and the kids are so computer savvy now and internet savvy, more than most of us, I get a huge kick when I read someone who's like 18 or 17 and just made their first million, and they're still doing their A-levels. And I'm like, you know what? Good for you. Good for you. And they've chosen the so-called traditional path. And I think the traditional path now is so watered down and is so, I don't say of little value, but it's of such less importance than it used to be. That people now have so many more options. You just just start. If you're 15 and you fancy setting up an eBay store, just find a way to make it happen. I don't care if you're not old enough in the T's and C's. Put it in your dad's name. Find a way.
Yeah, fantastic. So when the book is out this month, isn't it?
Yeah, it's out 14th of February, Valentine's Day. Great present to yourself. Maybe your wife wouldn't agree, but it's a great present. 14th of February, it's out. All great, all the usual bookstores online, Amazon, Waterstones, Blackwell's, Barnes & Noble in the States, Walmart,
Okay.
So it's available. And I'm just so blessed and thankful that the reception of it has been so phenomenal. I mean, it went to #1 on Amazon in the hot chart. It's won 4 awards so far in America.
Wow.
And and the reviews are averaging at 4.8 everywhere. And I'm like, so I'm very humbled by it. I wasn't expecting it, but like you say, might be the next door to walk through, Phil.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much, Harvey. Thanks for all of your time, and take care. And I look forward to talking to you when in the next installment.
Look forward to it. Thanks a lot, Phil. All the best.
Thank you.
Bye.
A huge thank you to my guest, Harvey Lee, for joining me today for the Now Spinning Magazine podcast to talk about his new book, Backstage Pass. 50% rock and roll, 50% business. There are some real laugh out loud moments, but equally there's some great advice for anybody, whatever your job is, whatever part of your career path you're on, whether you're thinking of venturing out on your own as an entrepreneur, starting your own business. There's some really interesting advice, and I love the way the book is positioned with the stories, like Harvey says, almost like a film script in the actual chapters, and then the kind of advice tagged on the end of each one as well. I think it's unique in its field. And I think, as Harvey said, if it had been a music book, he would have heard of Harvey perhaps. And if it had been a business book, there's just so many out there. But where it is, it's very unique. And I loved it, obviously. But one of the things I really liked was Harvey's stories about ACDC, especially things about the Bonfire box set I didn't know about. And again, how bands and music can interject our lives and take us down routes and motivate us to do certain things in our lives. And so I hope you found that really, really interesting and hopefully inspirational as well. So please check out the website, nowspinning.co.uk. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel, to the podcast. Check out the Facebook group, become a patron or YouTube member. Thank you for being here. Remember, music is the healer and the doctor. Take care, keep spinning those discs, and I shall see you all on the next episode.